One by one, every single lawyer walked away, leaving the millionaire completely alone. But just as the judge raised his gavel, a tiny 9-year-old girl stood up and whispered, "I'll take the case." The entire courtroom fell silent. Before we begin, if you love stories about unexpected heroes and second chances, you're in the right place. Click the like button, leave a comment telling me what you thought, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any chapters. Now, let's get started. The morning the world stopped laughing at Marcus Calloway began with the sound of a broom. It was 7:42 a.m. in the marble hallways of the Harwick County Courthouse in Cincinnati, Ohio, 17 hours before the most talked-about trial in a decade was set to begin. The building already hummed with the low electricity of anticipation. News vans lined 5th Street outside like a funeral procession. Reporters spoke in urgent whispers into cameras. Camera crews jostled for position near the main entrance. Everyone had come to watch a man go down, and Marcus Calloway, 31 years old, sat alone on a cold wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, staring at his hands. He was still handsome in the way that money makes people handsome. Tailored charcoal suit, strong jaw, dark eyes that had once been featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Boy Who Built a Billion." That cover felt like someone else's life now. His 3 attorneys had dropped him inside the last 48 hours. One cited ethical conflicts. One simply stopped returning calls. The third left a voicemail that Marcus had listened to 4 times already that morning. "I'm sorry, Marcus. No one wins this one. Cut a deal." There was no deal to cut, because he hadn't done it. 12 men were dead. Hundreds of families had lost everything they owned. And every newspaper, every television anchor, every online comment section in the country had already decided exactly who was responsible. The verdict wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, but in the court of public opinion, Marcus Calloway had been convicted months ago. The corridor was quiet at this hour. Just Marcus, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the soft rhythmic swish of a broom moving across the polished marble floor. He didn't notice her at first. She was small, so small that the broom handle rose nearly a full foot above her head. A little girl with pale blonde hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing a faded yellow dress and white sneakers with a hole worn through the left toe. She swept with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who had long ago learned not to waste a single movement. 9 years old, maybe. It was hard to tell. There was something in her blue eyes that was far older than her face. Marcus watched her the way desperate men watch ordinary things. Like the whole world was ending and somehow a child sweeping a courthouse floor was the only proof that it would keep going without him. She stopped. She looked directly at him. Not at his expensive suit, not at the newspaper folded on the bench beside him with his own face printed on the front page above the word monster. She looked at him. "You're Mr. Calloway," she said. It wasn't a question. He almost smiled. "Guilty as charged." The words tasted like ash the moment they left his mouth. "You don't have a lawyer." "I'm aware of that, yes." She leaned the broom handle carefully against the wall. Then she reached behind her cleaning cart and lifted out a worn leather satchel. The kind that looked like it had survived 3 decades and several rainstorms, and didn't apologize for either. She set it on the bench beside him and unzipped it with both hands. Slowly, the way you open something sacred. Inside were papers, hundreds of pages, covered in small, precise handwriting, organized with rubber bands and paper clips and color-coded sticky note tabs. It was a system that would have made a senior paralegal envious. The little girl sat down beside Marcus Calloway, with the quiet gravity of a judge taking the bench. "My name is Lily Harper," she said, "and I'd like to represent you." Marcus stared at her for a long, still moment. Then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he laughed. It would be the last time either of them laughed for a very long time. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of approaching voices, reporters, clerks, the great indifferent machinery of the courthouse waking up. In less than 17 hours, courtroom 4B would be packed with cameras and lawyers and a jury whose minds had been made up before they ever swore their oath. But in this quiet corridor, in this suspended moment, a 9-year-old girl looked at the most hated man in America and did not flinch. She opened the first tabbed section of her satchel. Her small finger landed on a line of handwritten notes. "Mr. Calloway," she said, barely above a whisper, "I found something. Something every single one of your lawyers missed." She looked up at him. "And I think it changes everything." The laughter started the moment Lily Harper pushed open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B. It was not cruel laughter, not at first. It was the laughter of pure, stunned disbelief, the kind that ripples through a crowd when something so impossible happens that the only sane response is to assume it is a joke. Reporters looked at each other. Jury members craned their necks. Two of the prosecution's attorneys actually set down their pens. Lily walked down the center aisle, with her worn leather satchel over one shoulder and her braid slightly loose from a long morning, and she did not look left or right. She walked to the defense table, placed her satchel on the chair beside Marcus Calloway, and sat down. The laughter grew. Judge Harold Whitmore, 64 years old, silver-haired, and entirely unaccustomed to surprises in his courtroom, peered over his reading glasses with an expression that moved through confusion, amusement, and genuine concern in 5 seconds flat. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the particular patience a man reserves for small children and very old dogs, "I believe you may have the wrong room." "No, sir," Lily said clearly. "I am here to represent Mr. Marcus Calloway in the matter of the state of Ohio versus Calloway. I would like to approach the bench to file a notice of appearance." The laughter erupted fully now. From the gallery. From the prosecution table, where lead attorney Douglas Farrell, expensive suit, silver cufflinks, a record of 31 consecutive wins, let out a short bark of amusement that he didn't bother hiding. "Your Honor," Farrell said, rising smoothly, "I think we can all agree this is—" "I have the paperwork," Lily said. She stood, unzipped her satchel, and produced a document. 3 pages, handwritten in small, careful cursive, with every required field filled out and the proper case number cited at the top. She walked it to the clerk, who looked at it with wide eyes, then up at the judge, then back at the paper. Judge Whitmore took it, read it, turned it over, read it again. The laughter in the room had begun to quiet in the way a tide goes out, slowly, then all at once. "Miss Harper," the judge said, "how old are you?" 9.5, Your Honor. "I know courts do not typically permit minors to practice law, but I have researched that in emergency circumstances, specifically when a defendant has been abandoned by all counsel on the eve of trial, a judge has discretionary authority to permit an unlicensed representative if no licensed attorney is available, and delay is not feasible. I cited the relevant case law on page 2. The silence in the room was absolute. Judge Whitmore looked at page 2. He looked at the case citations. He looked at Lily Harper. Then he looked at Douglas Farrell, whose amusement had drained away and been replaced by something harder to read. "I will allow a brief recess," the judge said finally, "to consider this matter." As the bailiff called for order and the gallery broke into urgent whispers, Marcus leaned slowly toward Lily. "Where did you learn to do that?" he breathed. She didn't look at him. She was already pulling the next tabbed section from her satchel. "My father used to be a law clerk," she said quietly. "Before the accident, he has all his books." A pause. "I have been reading them since I was 6. Marcus stared at the side of her face. This 9-year-old child in a faded yellow dress, sitting in the most high-profile courtroom in Ohio, surrounded by cameras and lawyers, and a story that had already been written without her. "Lily," he said, "why are you doing this?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, still not looking at him, "Because I know what it feels like when everyone decides you are guilty before they bother finding out the truth." She turned a page. Her finger found a line of notes. And because what I found in those documents, Mr. Calloway, it is not just proof you did not do this. She finally looked up at him. It is proof of who did. The recess lasted 40 minutes. In that time, Judge Whitmore made 3 phone calls, reviewed Lily's filing twice more, and consulted with his clerk about 14 historical precedents she had cited, 11 of which checked out completely. Marcus sat at the defense table and watched Lily work. She didn't fidget. Didn't look around the room at the cameras or the crowd, or the prosecution team huddled in urgent conference across the aisle. She read through her handwritten notes with the steady concentration of someone who had learned long ago that distraction was a luxury she couldn't afford. Your father was a law clerk, Marcus said softly. What happened to him? Lily didn't look up immediately. When she did, her face was composed in the way children's faces get when they have had to explain hard things too many times to too many adults. Trucking accident, 3 years ago. He was coming home from a night shift. She turned a page. The other driver ran a red light. My dad survived, but he cannot walk anymore, and his hands shake too much to write. The settlement paid for 6 months of bills. A pause. That was 3 years ago. Marcus was quiet. So you took the cleaning job, he said. The courthouse custodian, Mr. Delgado, he lets me come in at 6:30 before school. I sweep the main corridor and the 2 side halls on the ground floor. He gives me $40 a week. She said it without self-pity, the way you state a fact about weather. It covers Tommy's school lunch and May's asthma medicine. Tommy was 6. May was 4. Marcus had learned their names during the conversation in the corridor that morning, when Lily had spoken about them with the same matter-of-fact love that most people reserve for children they have raised for decades. Does anyone know you're here, doing this? Marcus asked. Mr. Delgado knows. He told me I was being foolish. A small, private smile crossed her face, there and gone in an instant. He also ironed my dress this morning. Marcus looked down at his hands. Outside these walls, 12 dead men's families sat in the gallery, waiting to watch him convicted. The story the prosecution had built was airtight, or had seemed that way until this morning. 12 miners killed in the Meridian mining shaft collapse outside Columbus. Hundreds of retirement accounts drained. Safety reports falsified. And at the center of it all, the man who had acquired Meridian Mining 14 months before the disaster, Marcus Calloway. Except that Marcus had never once ordered a single safety cut, had never seen the falsified reports, had trusted his CFO completely, had trusted Victor Crane. Lily, Marcus said carefully. The proof you mentioned this morning. How did you find it? She reached into the second tabbed section of her satchel and removed a folded sheet of paper, a printout, coffee-stained, with a date stamp in the corner. She placed it on the table between them but kept her hand flat on top of it. I found it in a trash bag, she said. 6 weeks ago. IT disposal. They leave the bags outside the records annex on Tuesday nights before the recycling truck comes Wednesday morning. She looked at him steadily. Most people do not go through trash bags, but I have learned that people throw away things they think nobody will ever look at again. She lifted her hand from the paper. Marcus looked down. His blood went cold. It was a server log, a partial one, printed from what appeared to be Meridian Mining's internal system. In the columns of timestamps and user IDs, a single line had been circled in red pencil, with a careful note written beside it in Lily's handwriting. This file was modified after the official submission date. Someone changed it. Who had access? Below the question, she had written 3 letters. VC, Victor Crane. Marcus looked up. Across the aisle, Douglas Farrell was watching them. And behind the prosecution table, in the front row of the gallery, sat a man in a dark wool suit, with silver hair and cold grey eyes. Victor Crane looked directly at the defense table. Then his gaze moved, slowly, deliberately, to the little girl in the yellow dress. And he did not look away. Court resumed at 11:15. Judge Whitmore granted Lily provisional status as Marcus's legal representative under emergency counsel doctrine, with the caveat that he reserved the right to appoint licensed co-counsel if proceedings became legally untenable. Douglas Farrell objected 4 times. The judge overruled him 4 times, each with the same dry patience that suggested he was as surprised by his own decision as anyone. The gallery erupted when the ruling was announced. Phones went up. People stood. A woman near the back cried out. Lily did not react. She uncapped her pen. The prosecution's opening statement was masterful. Farrell had refined it into something devastating, a story of greed, of a young billionaire who saw Meridian Mining as nothing more than a line item, who had stripped the company's safety budget to inflate his quarterly returns, who had looked at 12 men going underground every morning and calculated that their lives were worth less than his profit margin. It was a compelling story. It was well supported. And most of it, Marcus knew, was based on documents that Victor Crane had created. When Farrell finished, the jury was looking at Marcus the way people look at something broken beyond fixing. Judge Whitmore turned to the defense table. Miss Harper, opening statement. Lily stood up. She was so small that when she faced the jury, several of them visibly softened, that involuntary human response to a child in a serious place. Then she began to speak, and the softness in the room shifted into something else entirely. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, in a voice that was clear and steady and not performing anything at all. My name is Lily Harper. I am 9 years old. I sweep this courthouse every morning. And 6 weeks ago, while going through discarded documents from the records annex, I found something that tells a completely different story than the one you just heard. Not a sound in the courtroom. You were told that Marcus Calloway falsified safety reports to save money, but I am going to show you that those reports were not falsified by Mr. Calloway. She paused, just long enough. They were falsified by the man who prepared them, submitted them, and then destroyed the originals, before blaming someone else for what he had done. She reached into her satchel and removed a stack of documents organized behind labeled tabs. I am going to ask you to pay attention to timestamps, she said, specifically to the difference between when a document is supposed to have been created and when it was actually created. She held up the top page. And I am going to ask you, if Marcus Calloway was the one who falsified these records, why does the metadata show that the files were modified by a different user 14 months after Mr. Calloway had already been removed from day-to-day operations? Farrell was on his feet. Objection. Argument, not opening statement, and the documents have not been entered into evidence. I will be entering them into evidence, Lily said calmly, beginning with Exhibit A. She set the page on the clerk's desk. Judge Whitmore studied it. Then he looked at Farrell, then at Lily. He removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, replaced them. Proceed, Miss Harper, he said quietly. Marcus sat very still. He had arrived this morning believing this day would end him. For the first time in 8 months, he felt something entirely unexpected rising inside his chest. He felt hope. Across the aisle, he watched Douglas Farrell lean down and whisper something urgent to his second chair. He watched the second chair open a laptop and begin searching quickly through files, fingers moving fast, expression tightening. And in the front row of the gallery, Victor Crane sat completely motionless. His gray eyes had not left Lily Harper since she stood up. Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. She found something real, he thought. And somewhere in this building someone already knows it. The lunch recess came at 12:40, and Marcus Calloway did something he hadn't done in 8 months of legal proceedings. He felt hungry. The holding room behind courtroom 4B was small. A table, 4 chairs, a window with frosted glass letting in gray November light. A deputy stood outside the closed door. Marcus sat across from Lily Harper and watched her eat half a peanut butter sandwich from a wax paper bag while she read through her notes with her free hand. You should eat, she said, without looking up. I'm not sure I deserve to feel normal, he said. She looked up at that. Something moved through her expression. Not quite judgment, not quite sympathy. Understanding, maybe. The understanding of someone who also knew what it felt like to not feel entitled to ordinary things. Feeling normal is not a reward you earn, she said. It is how you stay sharp enough to fight. She pushed the other half of the sandwich toward him. Eat. Marcus ate. In the morning session, Lily had entered 7 documents into evidence. Farrell had objected to each one. The judge had admitted 5 and reserved judgment on 2, pending chain of custody verification. For a 9-year-old working from a second-hand satchel, it was a staggering result. But the morning session had revealed something Marcus was turning over carefully in his mind. During cross-examination of the prosecution's first witness, a forensic accountant named Gerald Hess, Lily had asked a series of questions about Meridian Mining's internal file management system. Hess had answered each one with decreasing confidence. When she asked him to identify the user ID associated with the modified safety report in Exhibit C, he had paused for 4 full seconds before giving a vague answer about shared administrator access. Lily had not pushed further. She had simply thanked him and sat down. Then she had written something in the margin of her notes. Now, in the holding room, Marcus leaned forward and looked at what she had written. It was a name, R. Whitfield. "Who is Robert Whitfield?" Marcus asked. Lily looked at him carefully. "How did you know his first name was Robert?" "I didn't. I guessed." Marcus felt something turn over in his chest. Victor Crane's personal IT administrator. Been with Victor for 11 years. Followed him from his last 3 companies. He paused. "I fired him 8 months ago when I found out he'd installed monitoring software on my personal laptop. Victor told me I was overreacting. He told me Whitfield was loyal." Lily opened her satchel and removed a second printout, a partial page from what looked like an internal IT access log, the paper soft at the fold lines from being handled many times. "R. Whitfield is the user ID listed on the Meridian Mining file server," she said. "He is the one who accessed and modified the safety reports, but here is what matters." Her finger moved to a column on the right side of the log. The access was remotely authorized, meaning someone with higher-level credentials approved it. She pointed to a 4-digit code, 0047. "I do not know whose authorization code that is yet, but I know it was not yours." "How do you know it wasn't mine?" "Because your administrator code at Meridian was 0023. I found it in the original onboarding records from when you acquired the company." She had already turned back to her notes. "Code 0047 was issued 18 months before you ever purchased Meridian Mining." Marcus sat back in his chair. The lunch in front of him went cold. 18 months before the acquisition, which meant that whatever Victor Crane had been planning at Meridian Mining, he had been planning it before Marcus was ever in the picture. Marcus hadn't walked into a company and run it into the ground. He had been steered toward a company that was already being quietly hollowed out, and positioned perfectly to take the blame when it collapsed. He had been the plan. "Lily," he said slowly, "this is bigger than a safety violation. This is premeditated. If Crane planned this from the start, if he brought me in specifically to frame me, he would have needed help. Inside the courthouse. In the investigation itself." Lily's pen paused over her notes. "I know," she said, quietly, almost carefully. Marcus looked at her. This 9-year-old girl who swept floors before school and read law books by lamplight and had apparently been sitting alone for 6 weeks with the knowledge that a very powerful, very dangerous man had committed an enormous, patient crime. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. The gray light came through the frosted glass. Somewhere in the building a door opened and closed. "Yes," she said. "But that does not change what I have to do." She capped her pen, straightened her papers, looked at the door. "The afternoon session is in 12 minutes, she said. "I need you to trust me for what comes next." Marcus nodded. What he didn't tell her, what he only understood in that cold, clarifying moment, was that he already did. Completely, and without reservation, the way you trust someone who has never once said a thing they didn't mean. The afternoon session began quietly and ended like a thunderclap. Farrell called his second witness, Dr. Patricia Owens, a safety compliance expert from Cleveland who had authored the official inspection report on the Meridian mining shaft 3 months before the collapse. She was polished, credentialed, and utterly convincing. Her testimony painted a meticulous portrait of deliberate negligence, outdated support beams, suppressed air quality readings, a maintenance log that had been gutted and rewritten, all pointing, document by document, to decisions made at the ownership level, to Marcus Calloway. Lily cross-examined her for 19 minutes. She was methodical, almost gentle at first, asking clarifying questions, letting Owens settle into confidence. Then, in the final 5 minutes, everything shifted. Dr. Owens, when you conducted your inspection, were you given access to the original digital maintenance logs, or only printed copies? A beat. Printed copies. Who provided those printed copies? The compliance officer at Meridian Mining. And that compliance officer reported directly to whom? Another beat, shorter, but Marcus heard it. The chief financial officer. Victor Crane. Yes. So the documents you based your entire report on were printed by a man who reported to Victor Crane from digital files you never personally accessed. Lily looked at her steadily. Is that correct? The documents were officially submitted and... Is that correct, Dr. Owens? The witness looked at Farrell, then back at Lily. Yes. Lily reached into her satchel. I would like to enter Exhibit L into evidence. This is a comparison of the printed maintenance log provided to Dr. Owens. She held up one page, and the original digital maintenance log recovered from Meridian Mining's backup server, produced this morning under subpoena. She held up a second page. I would like the court to note that these two documents, which should be identical, contain 47 discrepancies. The courtroom went very, very still. Farrell stood slowly. Something moved through his face that Marcus had never seen there before. Uncertainty. Your Honor, I request time to review these documents before... The subpoena was filed 4 days ago, Mr. Farrell, Lily said. The documents arrived this morning. You received the same copies I did. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Farrell, were you aware of discrepancies between the printed and digital versions of this maintenance log? The silence stretched like something being torn slowly in half. Your Honor, Farrell said carefully, we were provided the printed documents by the investigating agency and had no reason to verify them, Lily said quietly. Not as an attack. Almost sadly. Because the man who provided them was a cooperating witness. Because he had already told you the story, and the documents fit the story, and nobody went looking for the digital originals. She paused, just one breath. Until now. In the gallery, Victor Crane had gone absolutely still. And in that stillness, that marble-cold stillness of a man watching a plan he had spent years constructing begin to fracture, Marcus saw something he recognized. He had seen it on the day of the collapse, when he had confronted Victor in his office, and Victor had listened to his fury with that same patient, unmoving expression. Not guilt, not fear, calculation. Victor Crane was not panicking. Victor Crane was adapting. As the judge called an emergency recess to review Exhibit L, as Farrell and his team bent over their table in urgent conference, Victor rose calmly from his gallery seat. He straightened his jacket. He turned toward the door. And as he passed the defense table, he did not look at Marcus. He looked at Lily. He looked at her the way you look at a problem that has just changed shape into something more dangerous than you expected. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. And then he smiled. The smallest, coldest smile Marcus had ever seen on a human face. Then he walked out of the courtroom without hurrying, without looking back. Lily watched him go. Under the defense table, where no one could see, her hand gripped the edge of her satchel until her knuckles were white. It was the only sign she gave. When she turned back to her notes, her face was perfectly composed. But Marcus had been watching, and he had seen her hand. He leaned close. "Lily," he said quietly, "whatever else is in that satchel, we need to talk tonight." "Before tomorrow's session," she nodded once, slowly. "There is one more thing," she whispered, "something I have not shown anyone, something that does not just prove you are innocent." She paused, her eyes still on her papers. "It proves that someone inside this courthouse has been working for Victor Crane for the past 2 years. The recess buzzer sounded. The gallery erupted. The cameras turned as one, and outside these walls, a man in a dark wool suit walked calmly to a black car, sat in the back seat, closed the door, and made a phone call. The person on the other end answered on the first ring. "We have a problem," Victor Crane said quietly. A long pause. "Yes," he said. "It is the girl." They met at 7:15 that evening in the small break room on the courthouse's second floor, the one the janitors used, with its humming vending machine and sticky linoleum floor and single flickering fluorescent tube that nobody had replaced in months. Mr. Delgado had let them in with his master key and stood guard in the hallway outside, arms crossed, a man who had stopped believing this was foolish somewhere around the moment the judge said proceed. Lily spread her papers on the table. Marcus sat across from her with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. She reached into the innermost pocket of her satchel, a zippered compartment she hadn't opened all day, and removed a thin manila envelope. She set it between them. It was sealed, but the seal had been carefully reglued. Someone had opened it before. "I found this 3 Tuesdays ago," she said. "Same trash run. Different bag. This one was mixed in with shredded paper from the administrative offices upstairs. The envelope was torn, but the contents were intact." She looked at him steadily. "I almost did not open it, but the return address on the front was a numbered LLC registered in Delaware. And I had seen that LLC number before." Marcus looked at the envelope. "Where?" "In the wire transfer records attached to Exhibit F. The same LLC received 4 payments totaling $900,000 over 18 months. She unfolded a handwritten chart, neat columns, dates, amounts, account numbers connected by careful pencil lines. The payments originated from a holding company controlled by Victor Crane, but the LLC that received them, the same one on this envelope, is registered to a man named Dennis Foley." Marcus went still. "Dennis Foley, the lead investigator on my case." "Yes." The fluorescent light flickered. Neither of them moved. $900,000, Marcus said quietly. "Paid to the man responsible for collecting the evidence that convicted me." He looked at the envelope. "What is inside?" Lily opened it. Inside were 2 pages. The first was a typed letter, brief and businesslike, with no salutation and no signature. It laid out a schedule of payments and a list of tasks, evidence to be gathered, witnesses to be directed, a chain of custody to be maintained in a particular way. The language was clinical, careful, the language of a contract, the language of someone who had done this kind of thing before. The second page was a photograph. It showed Dennis Foley and Victor Crane standing together at what appeared to be a private marina. Boats in the background, late afternoon sun, both men relaxed and smiling. Foley had his arm around Victor's shoulder. On the back of the photograph, written in pencil, Hilton Head, April 2nd years prior. 14 months before Marcus even acquired Meridian Mining. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. "This is enough," he said finally. "This is enough to take Foley apart on the stand and blow the entire investigation open." "Yes," Lily said. She was watching him with an expression that was carefully neutral. "But there is something else you need to know before tomorrow." She reached into the satchel one more time. What she produced was a single handwritten note. Not hers, not in her careful cursive. The handwriting was hasty, block letters, like someone writing in a hurry or in the dark. It had been slipped under the door of her family's apartment the previous night. Marcus read it. "Stop now. We know where you live. We know about Tommy and May. This is your only warning." The room was very quiet. Marcus looked up. Lily was already watching him, and her face was composed in that way it got. That particular composure that he was beginning to understand was not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue anyway. "Lily," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You cannot. This is not your fight anymore. This is dangerous. These people killed 12 men, she said, and they let someone else take the blame for it." She took the note back and folded it carefully. "And they sent a threatening letter to a 9-year-old girl." Her chin lifted, just slightly. "I think that tells you everything you need to know about who they are, and I think that is exactly why I cannot stop." From the hallway, Mr. Delgado knocked twice on the door. "Time to go." Lily began packing her papers. Marcus watched her zip her satchel with both hands, methodical and precise, the way she did everything. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly, "we call Dennis Foley to the stand." "Yes," she said. "It will get loud." "I know. Are you ready?" She picked up her satchel. She looked at him once across the sticky linoleum table, in the flickering light of a room that smelled like old coffee and floor wax. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I have been getting ready for 3 years." Dennis Foley walked to the witness stand the following morning with the unhurried confidence of a man who had testified in hundreds of trials and regarded the experience the way a surgeon regards a routine procedure. He was 52, broad-shouldered, with a silver buzz cut and a jaw built for authority. He had spent 23 years in law enforcement. He had closed 71 cases. He did not look at Lily Harper when he settled into the stand. That was his first mistake. Farrell led him through 40 minutes of direct examination. It was thorough, well-rehearsed, and devastating, a systematic account of how the investigation had unfolded, how the evidence had accumulated, how every trail, when followed, led back to Marcus Calloway. Foley delivered it all with calm, practiced certainty. When he was done, 3 jurors were nodding. Judge Whitmore turned to the defense table. "Miss Harper, your witness." Lily stood. She walked to the podium, set her notes face down in front of her, and looked at Dennis Foley for a long moment without speaking. Foley looked back. His expression was indulgent, patient. "Mr. Foley," Lily began, "how long have you known Victor Crane?" A brief pause. "I don't have a personal relationship with Mr. Crane. He was a cooperating witness in my investigation." "That is not what I asked," Lily said. "I asked how long you have known him." We met during the course of this investigation. April of 2 years ago. Does that date mean anything to you?" Something shifted behind Foley's eyes. "Almost nothing. A cloud passing at great distance." "No." "Were you in Hilton Head, South Carolina in April of that year?" A longer pause. "I may have taken personal travel that spring." "I don't recall specifically." "I would like to enter Exhibit M into evidence," Lily said. She produced the photograph. She walked it to the clerk without hurrying. "This is a photograph taken at a marina in Hilton Head, South Carolina. The date stamp on the original digital file indicates April of 2 years ago. I have subpoenaed the marina's visitor registration for that weekend." She placed a second document beside the photograph. "Mr. Foley's name appears on the registered guest list, as does Victor Crane's." The courtroom shifted the way a boat shifts when a wave passes under it, that slow, collective lean of something destabilizing. Foley's jaw tightened. He looked at Douglas Farrell. Farrell was writing something rapidly on a legal pad, not looking up. "Mr. Foley," Lily continued, her voice unchanged, "are you familiar with a Delaware LLC registered under the number 7741CR? Foley looked straight ahead. "I am not." "You are not." Lily reached for the next document. "I would like to enter Exhibit N, bank records for a personal account in Mr. Dennis Foley's name, obtained under subpoena, showing 4 wire transfers received over 18 months totaling $900,000. The originating account traces to LLC 7741CR. She looked at Foley. "Do you recognize these transfers, Mr. Foley?" The gallery was so quiet that Marcus could hear the clock on the courtroom wall. Foley said nothing. He looked at Farrell with the look of a man searching for an exit he has just realized doesn't exist. Farrell stood. "Your Honor, I must object. The defense is introducing sensitive financial documents without proper... They were subpoenaed 4 days ago through proper judicial channels, Your Honor," Lily said. "The chain of custody is documented in the filing." Judge Whitmore looked at the documents the clerk had handed him. He looked at them for a long time. He looked at Dennis Foley. "Mr. Foley," the judge said quietly, "I am going to advise you at this time of your Fifth Amendment rights." The room erupted. It took the bailiff nearly 3 minutes to restore order. In that time, Marcus sat at the defense table and felt something shift inside him. The slow, massive, tectonic movement of a truth finally breaking free of the weight that had been holding it down. He felt it in his chest, his hands, behind his eyes. Across the gallery, Victor Crane sat with his arms folded, his face perfectly still. But his right hand, resting on his knee, had curled into a fist. And in that fist, Marcus saw everything Lily had been carrying alone for 6 weeks. The risk, the weight, the quiet courage of a 9-year-old girl who found the truth in a trash bag and decided it deserved to be heard. He looked at her. She was already making notes for the next witness. She didn't look up, but the corner of her mouth, just for a half-second, moved upward. By mid-afternoon, 3 things had happened that nobody in courtroom 4B would ever quite recover from. First, Dennis Foley had invoked the Fifth Amendment 11 times before Judge Whitmore excused him from the stand and ordered an emergency review of his role in the investigation. Second, Douglas Farrell had requested a 24-hour continuance, which the judge denied. Third, and this was the thing that sent the television crews outside sprinting back to their vans, Judge Whitmore had issued an emergency subpoena for Victor Crane to appear as a witness for the defense. Victor Crane, who had left the building the previous afternoon without being called. Victor Crane, who had sat in that gallery for 7 days as a private citizen, untouchable. Victor Crane, who now had until 9 o'clock the following morning to present himself to courtroom 4B. Marcus watched the news coverage on a small television in the holding room during the afternoon recess. A legal analyst on CNN was saying, with great authority, that this was the most unusual trial she had witnessed in 30 years. Another analyst was saying the word mistrial. A third was saying conspiracy. A fourth, a retired federal prosecutor with a silver beard and a grave expression, said something that made Marcus go very still. "What this little girl has done," the man said carefully, "is not just remarkable. If those financial documents hold up, and I have reason to believe they will, then what she has uncovered is not a safety violation. It is not even just a frame-up. It is organized obstruction of justice at the investigative level. That is federal territory. That changes everything." The bailiff came to bring Marcus back to court. Marcus turned off the television. In the corridor, Lily was waiting on the bench where they had first met, just 2 days ago, though it felt like a different lifetime. She was reviewing her notes. She had a red smudge of something on the side of her hand that might have been jelly from the sandwich she'd eaten too fast. Marcus sat down beside her. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I found a conflict in the chain of custody form for Exhibit C," she said without looking up. "I need to address it before Farrell does." "That is not what I asked." She paused, looked up, looked at him. Something crossed her face that was younger than her usual expression. Something that belonged to a 9-year-old and not to whatever force of nature had been sitting at that defense table for 2 days. Just for a moment. Then it settled. "I called home at lunch," she said. Tommy answered. He said May was watching cartoons and Dad was in his chair by the window. A pause. "I told him I would be home by 8. "Will you?" "I always am," she said. No matter what. She closed her notes. They need to know that some things do not change, even when everything else does. Marcus nodded. He looked at his hands on his knees, the hands that had appeared on magazine covers, that had shaken hands with senators, that had signed the papers acquiring Meridian Mining on a bright Tuesday morning 14 months before the worst day of his life. My mother died when I was 11, he said. He had not said that out loud to anyone in years. My father worked 3 jobs and still lost the house. I built everything I have from nothing because I swore I would never feel helpless again. He paused. And then one morning I woke up and I was the most hated man in America, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. Lily listened. She didn't fill the silence with comfort. And then you sat down next to me, he said. She looked at the corridor ahead of them, the marble floor, the fluorescent lights, the great impersonal machinery of justice that had ground forward without noticing either of them until 2 days ago. Nobody should be helpless when the truth is on their side, she said quietly. That is all. The bailiff appeared at the end of the hall. Time. They walked back to courtroom 4B side by side, the 31-year-old billionaire who had lost everything, and the 9-year-old girl who swept floors in the dark, carrying a satchel full of handwritten notes and the patient, unbreakable conviction that the truth was worth the cost of finding it. Victor Crane arrived at courtroom 4B at 8:57 the following morning. He arrived with 2 attorneys, not Farrell, who had spent the previous night in emergency consultation with his own legal team, and arrived at court looking like a man who had not slept, but 2 new lawyers, sharp-suited, younger, with the particular focused energy of people brought in for crisis management. Victor himself was as composed as he had been every other morning, his dark wool suit perfect, his silver hair immaculate. He took the stand without being asked twice. He adjusted the microphone. He looked at the courtroom with the mild, cooperative expression of a man who had nothing to hide and found the entire proceedings a minor inconvenience. Lily waited until he was settled. Mr. Crane, she began, you served as Chief Financial Officer of Callaway Enterprises, including Meridian Mining, for 26 months. Is that correct? It is. And during that time you had full administrative access to Meridian Mining's internal file servers. As CFO, yes, standard access for financial oversight. Authorization code 0047. A pause so brief that most people in the room didn't catch it. I don't recall the specific code. That is all right, Lily said. The IT administrator records recall it for you. I have entered the documentation as Exhibit Q. She moved on before he could respond. Mr. Crane, are you familiar with a man named Robert Whitfield? He worked in IT support for my team. He did, until Mr. Callaway terminated his employment after discovering monitoring software on Mr. Callaway's personal devices. She turned a page. Software that Mr. Whitfield had installed. At whose instruction? Whitfield acted independently. I had no knowledge. I would like to enter Exhibit R, Lily said. This is an internal communication. An email, recovered from a backup server, sent from an account registered to Victor Crane to Robert Whitfield, instructing him to, and I quote, maintain visibility on Callaway's communications going forward. She looked at him steadily. Does this refresh your memory, Mr. Crane? Victor's 2 attorneys were on their feet simultaneously. The judge allowed the objections and overruled them with the same steady patience he had been applying for 2 days, like a man who had decided to see where this road went and intended to follow it all the way to the end. Victor Crane looked at Lily Harper across the witness stand. The courtroom, the cameras, the packed gallery, all of it seemed to recede, and for a moment it was simply the 2 of them, the man who had built a perfect crime over 3 years, and the girl who had found it in a trash bag. He smiled. Not the cold smile from 2 days ago. Something different, almost admiring. The smile of someone who respects the thing that has beaten them. You are very thorough, he said quietly, off microphone. Mr. "Crane," Judge Whitmore said sharply, "please respond to the question." But the question had been answered. The jury had heard those 3 words. The gallery had heard them. Every camera in the room had caught the expression on Victor Crane's face in the instant before the mask came back down. And in that instant, that single unguarded moment, Victor Crane had told the truth for the first time in 3 years. What followed was 2 hours of methodical, precise dismantling. Lily worked through 11 exhibits with the unhurried focus of someone who had rehearsed this, not in a law office or a classroom, but at a kitchen table at midnight, with a paralytic father asleep down the hall and 2 small children breathing softly in the next room. By the time she said, "No further questions," Victor Crane had contradicted his earlier statements 4 times, failed to explain 3 financial documents, and watched the judge mark 2 more items for emergency federal review. His attorneys requested a recess the moment Lily sat down. In the gallery, 12 families of 12 dead miners sat very still, and one woman, a widow in the 3rd row, who had not taken her eyes off Lily Harper since the first day of trial, pressed both hands over her mouth and bent forward as though she had been holding her breath for a very long time. She was finally allowed to let it out. Chapter 11. Before the last door. The night before closing arguments, Marcus Calloway could not sleep. He sat in the small apartment the court had arranged for him, supervised, monitored the terms of his bail, and looked out the window at the Cincinnati skyline. The river, the bridges, the ordinary, indifferent beauty of a city that had spent 8 months deciding he was a monster. His phone had been ringing for 2 days. Former colleagues, journalists, his accountant, his remaining business partners, people who had been silent for 8 months, suddenly finding their voices, as though a verdict not yet delivered had already changed the weather. He did not answer. He thought about 12 men going underground on a Tuesday morning. He thought about their families. He thought about the fact that, even if he was acquitted tomorrow, fully, completely, publicly, those men would still be dead. That fact lived in him in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with having been close to the machinery that killed them without ever knowing it was running. He thought about Victor Crane, who was currently under federal investigation and had been ordered to surrender his passport. His 2 crisis attorneys had not been sufficient. The situation had gone past crisis management into something else entirely. He thought about Dennis Foley, who had retained his own attorney and was speaking to federal prosecutors in a private room somewhere across the city. And he thought about Lily Harper. At 9:45, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photograph. It showed the break room on the courthouse's 2nd floor, the one with the vending machine and the sticky linoleum. Lily's satchel was on the table. The satchel was open, and the zippered inside pocket, the one that had held the manila envelope, was empty. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he called the courthouse security desk. Then he called Judge Whitmore's emergency line. Then he sat by the window and made himself breathe slowly. The way you breathe when everything in you wants to run, but you understand, bone deep, that running is the one thing you cannot do. The break room had been accessed after hours. The satchel had been gone through. The manila envelope, the original, not a copy, was gone. But Lily had been methodical. She had been careful. She had been preparing for 6 weeks before Marcus ever knew she existed. And Marcus, who had trusted her without reservation since the 2nd day of trial, suddenly understood something he should have understood sooner. The original envelope was gone. But Lily Harper had made copies of everything, because she was 9 years old, and she had survived 3 years of a hard life by learning that the most important rule of all is this: you never carry everything in one bag. The next morning, Marcus arrived at courtroom 4B at 8:30. Lily was already there, seated at the defense table, her backup satchel, smaller, older, blue canvas instead of leather, open in front of her. She looked up when he sat down. "Someone broke into the break room last night," he said quietly. "I know," she said. Mr. Delgado called me at 10. The original envelope is gone. She looked at him calmly. But I made 3 copies of everything the same day I found it. One is in this bag. One is in a safety deposit box at Fifth Third Bank. One is with a journalist at the Cincinnati Enquirer, to be opened if anything happens to me. She paused. I am 9 years old, Mr. Calloway, but I am not naive. Marcus stared at her. Something came up in his chest that was too large and too complicated for the room they were in. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked back at her. Lily, he said, and his voice was not entirely steady, when this is over. Close the case first, she said. Then we can talk about after. She turned back to her papers. The gallery was filling. The cameras were live. The jury was filing in. In the front row, Victor Crane's seat was empty for the first time. A federal agent sat where he had been. Judge Whitmore took the bench. We will now hear closing arguments, he said. Miss Harper, you may proceed. Lily Harper stood up. She straightened her notes. She looked at the jury. 12 people who had come into this room 8 days ago, having already made up their minds, and who were now looking at her with something very different from what they had arrived with. She took one breath. Outside these walls, the city was waking up. The river was moving. Somewhere across town, Tommy was getting ready for school, and May was breathing through the morning with her small asthmatic lungs, and a man in a wheelchair sat by a window watching the light change. And in courtroom 4B, a 9-year-old girl who swept floors for $40 a week opened her mouth and began to speak. Lily Harper spoke for 22 minutes. She did not use the podium. She stood in the open space between the defense table and the jury box, her blue canvas satchel on the chair behind her, her handwritten notes in her hands. And she spoke the way she had learned to speak from 3 years of reading law books aloud to a man who could no longer hold the pages himself, clearly, carefully, with every word earning its place. She did not perform emotion. She did not need to. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, you were asked 8 days ago to decide whether Marcus Calloway was guilty of the deaths of 12 men. You were told the answer was obvious. You were told the evidence was clear. She paused. I would like to suggest that the evidence was very clear, just not in the direction you were shown. She walked them through it one final time. Not every document, not every exhibit. She chose 7, arranged in a sequence so clean and logical that several jury members leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. She talked about authorization code 0047. She talked about the 18 months before the acquisition. She talked about $900,000 and a photograph taken at a marina, and a man who had invoked the Fifth Amendment 11 times rather than answer a 9-year-old girl's questions. She talked about 12 men who went underground on a Tuesday morning and did not come back up. Those men deserved better, she said, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering. Their families deserved better. They deserved someone who would go looking for the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient, even when a story had already been decided, even when... She paused, and in that pause the entire room breathed together. Even when the only person willing to look was a kid with a broom and a library of books, her father could not read anymore. Something moved through the gallery. Not sound, the opposite of sound, the held breath of 80 people simultaneously. I am not asking you to feel sorry for Marcus Calloway, Lily said. I am asking you to look at the evidence, all of it, including the evidence that was hidden from you until this week, and follow it where it leads. That is all justice is, not the story that arrives first, the truth that survives being looked at. She turned back to the defense table. She picked up her satchel. She sat down. Judge Whitmore said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the jury. He looked at Douglas Farrell, who rose for his closing with the expression of a man performing a duty he now understood to be fundamentally different from what he had believed a week ago. Farrell's closing lasted 9 minutes. He had arrived that morning with 40 pages of notes. He used 3 of them, The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Marcus sat in the holding room with his hands folded on the table and did not speak. Lily sat across from him and read through a small paperback legal primer she had pulled from her satchel because she was not the kind of person who wasted time and because there was nothing left to do now but wait, and waiting was something she had learned to do without letting it hollow her out. Mr. Delgado came in at one point with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the vending machine down the hall. He set them on the table without a word and went back out. The cups steamed quietly. Outside the frosted window, Cincinnati went about its business. Marcus looked at the cup. He looked at Lily. "Whatever happens," he said. She looked up from her book. "Whatever happens," he said again, "I want you to know that—" "Mr. Calloway," she said quietly, "it is going to be all right." She said it the way she said everything, not as reassurance, not as hope, but as a statement of fact she had already verified and found sound. Marcus nodded. He picked up the hot chocolate. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the bailiff knocked on the door. The jury filed in. Marcus stood. Lily stood beside him, small and still and present, the way she had been since the first moment she sat down at this table 8 days ago. The foreperson, a woman in her 60s with grey-streaked hair and the kind of face that had seen a great deal of life and was not easily moved, unfolded a single sheet of paper. She looked at it. Then she looked at Marcus Calloway. On the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death, 12 counts. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of securities fraud, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of falsification of federal safety documents, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. The gallery erupted. It was not the sound Marcus had imagined during 8 months of steeling himself for the worst. It was not clean or simple. It was the sound of a room full of people having something shift inside them. Grief and relief and outrage and something that would take a long time to name, all of it releasing at once in a wave that rolled to the ceiling and came back down changed. Marcus sat down. He had not planned to. His legs decided for him. He pressed his hands flat on the table and looked at them. The hands that had appeared on magazine covers, that had signed papers, that had shaken Victor Crane's hand at the acquisition dinner on a bright Tuesday morning. Completely unaware he was shaking hands with the architect of his destruction. Beside him, Lily set her notes down neatly, aligned the edges, and replaced the cap on her pen. He looked at her. She was looking at the widow in the 3rd row, the woman who had pressed both hands over her mouth during Victor's testimony. The woman was standing now, crying openly, the way people cry when they have finally stopped trying to manage it, her eyes fixed on Lily Harper with an expression that held more than gratitude. It held recognition. The recognition of one person who has carried something impossible for a very long time, finally seeing another. Lily held the woman's gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, a small, quiet nod that said what words could not have said as precisely. "I see you. It is not over, but it is different now." 3 weeks later, Victor Crane was indicted on 9 federal charges, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and criminal negligence resulting in death. Dennis Foley entered a plea agreement and agreed to testify fully. Robert Whitfield was arrested in Phoenix, Arizona on a Tuesday morning. Fittingly, the same day of the week the Meridian miners had gone underground for the last time. Douglas Farrell issued a public statement acknowledging he had been misled by fabricated evidence. He offered his personal apology to Marcus Calloway. Then he offered something more significant. He volunteered to assist the federal prosecution with everything in his files. Marcus Calloway's name was formally cleared. 3 magazines that had called him a monster ran corrections in their next issues. Not one of them put him on the cover again. He did not care about the covers. On a Saturday morning in December, Marcus Calloway knocked on the door of a second-floor apartment on Sycamore Street in Cincinnati's West End. The door was opened by a man in a wheelchair, lean, dark-eyed, with trembling hands, and a face that still carried the shape of someone who had been vital before the world rearranged his plans. He looked at Marcus for a long, measuring moment. "Mr. Harper," Marcus said, "my name is Marcus Calloway. I owe a very great deal to your daughter." "I know who you are," the man said. "Come in." The apartment was small and very clean. A bookshelf filled most of one wall, law books, worn paperbacks, encyclopedias with broken spines, a child's drawing tacked to the side, a stick figure in a yellow dress holding a briefcase above the words, "My Sister," in green crayon. Tommy was in the kitchen eating cereal. May was asleep on the couch under a blanket, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a child who has been carefully tended. Lily was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and her blue canvas satchel open beside her. She was reading. She looked up when Marcus came in, the way she always looked at him, directly, without performance, without distance. "I told you it would be all right," she said. "You did," he said. He sat down across from her. He placed an envelope on the table between them, plain white, her name on the front in his handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "A trust account," he said. "Established in your name, Tommy's and May's. It covers your father's medical care for as long as he needs it, the children's education through college and beyond, housing for your family." He paused. "And a full scholarship, 4 years undergraduate, 3 years law school, waiting for you whenever you're ready." Lily looked at the envelope. She looked at her father, who had wheeled himself to the doorway and was watching quietly. She looked at the bookshelf full of books she had been reading since she was 6, pulled from library sales and trash bags and anyone who would give them. She was quiet for a long moment. "You did not have to do that," she said, in a perfectly steady voice. "I know," Marcus said. "That is why I wanted to." She picked up the envelope and held it in both hands the way she held everything that mattered. Fully, with complete attention, as though it deserved to be felt. "There is one condition," Marcus added. She looked up. "When you pass the bar," he said, "I get to be your first client." Something happened to Lily Harper's face in that moment. Something that had nothing to do with composure or gravity, or the armor of calm she had worn for 3 hard years. Something simple and young and luminous broke open across her expression, the way a window thrown wide lets in light that reveals how dark the room had been. She smiled. Not the small, private smile she had allowed herself once across a courtroom. A real one, wide and sudden and lit entirely from the inside, the smile of a 9-year-old girl who was allowed, for this one Saturday morning, to be only exactly that. Tommy shouted something from the kitchen about cartoons. May stirred on the couch and called softly for her father. Outside on Sycamore Street, a December wind moved through the bare trees and across a city that did not yet fully understand what it had witnessed inside one of its courtrooms. A truth pulled from a trash bag. A frame built over 3 years dismantled in 8 days. 12 families given back what had been stolen. And a little girl with a broom who had walked into the fire because she understood, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had lived hard and refused to be made smaller by it, that someone had to. Lily Harper looked across a kitchen table at Marcus Calloway on a December morning, the envelope in her hands and her whole life stretching out ahead of her like a road finally cleared of everything that had been blocking it. "Deal," she said. And outside, the wind moved through the trees, the river kept moving, and the world, which had not been paying nearly enough attention, had absolutely no idea what was coming next.